Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webcast. We have a very interesting speaker who is going to join us from Silicon Valley. And we're going to talk about reinventing customer experience from inside out. Before I introduce you my speaker and the content for the webcast, let me first update you on a couple of housekeeping rules. During the webcast, you can ask questions via the chat box that appears on the screen, and please do ask questions. You can download the presentation, and you may also full screen the video by clicking the 4 arrows at the top right of your screen. At the end of the webcast, there will be a very brief evaluation form. We would be very happy if you could fill that in so that we improve ourselves for the future webcasts. Also, if you feel that the content is interesting for your colleagues and for your network, please feel free to share it. And the webcast will be available on demand after the recording. All right, so today I have a speaker who is based in Silicon Valley, and his name is Chris Brown. He's the co-author of an award-winning book, which is called The Customer Culture Imperative. Chris is the CEO of Market Culture. He's got a background in finance and marketing, but the most important thing about Chris is his customer obsession, and he also in his book relates the customer obsessed cultures into business performance, which is relevant for the companies to consider. Good morning, Chris.
Good morning. Good morning. It's great to be here. Thanks, Demet.
All right. So it would be very good if you could take us through the presentation.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it. Hi, everyone that's here joining us live. As Demet mentioned, a couple of years ago, we wrote a book with my co-author called The Customer Culture Imperative. And I wanted to take you through some of the ideas in that book because I think it's very relevant to the current day business environment and what's going on around the world. So really in the presentation, I want to cover 4 points. The first is really why being customer obsessed and really being customer centric is the only competitive advantage in today's business environment. We're going to talk about some lessons from some of the most customer obsessed organizations in the world, many of which are here in Silicon Valley, but also exist around the world. Also, we're going to look at how leaders at every level of an organization can have an impact on organizational culture and how do you actually make customer obsession a reality in businesses, because many companies, as we know, say they're customer focused, but are they really, and what's the real true test of that? So that's what we're going to cover in today's presentation. Is as I'm going through, if you've got questions in the chat box, please ask those.
Okay, Chris. Well, thanks for the introduction. I also want to mention that by watching this webcast, you could earn CP credits. So during the webcast, there will be 3 times pop-up screens where you will be asked to type your full name and your email address, and you need to stay alive till the end of the webcast to earn the credits. All right, let's start, Chris.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I hope everyone stays alive through this. I'll try and keep it as interesting as I can. So why this topic? You know, does customer-centric business matter to business performance? And if so, what is it that customer-centric companies do that's different from normal organizations, if you like? That's really the 2 answers that we wanted to answer with the book. 2 questions that we wanted to answer. So there's kind of 4 major driving forces around the need for this in organizations. And there's been a lot of media around disruption, so we know a lot about that, technology changing and really upending the way in which consumers do things. So that's been a big driver, and there are many stories around that. But also things like social media, the access to really what's it like to be a customer of a business. Consumers have tremendous power around sharing their experiences online in a way that they never had before. The other thing is expectations. So expectations are continuing to be elevated all the time. by organizations that are very customer centric. So companies like Apple are raising the bar for all organizations. So it doesn't matter that you run a government organization or you run a not-for-profit. You know, the expectations of people that are interacting with you are set by organizations that are excellent at delivering a great experience for customers. So that expectation level is really going up. And then the last thing is, you know, the commoditization of products. Products continue to look the same. So what's the differentiator between what you deliver to customers and your competitors? And so these are really the four key drivers that we're seeing in the market that are driving this need for customer centricity. And I wanted to talk a little bit about a company in Australia called Telstra, which is a big telecommunications firm down there that has, over a period of time, looked to try and transform their organisation to being more customer centric. So we know a lot of the organisations that are held up were sort of born in a customer centric way. But what do you need to do to actually shift the organisational culture to become more customer centric? I think David's a really good example of that. He was the CEO for about 5.5 years at Telstra, and during that period, he was able to really shift the organisation to be more customer centric. They had a history of being a very internally focused business, a government business that became privatised, and so they had a legacy of really being very internal orientation, and he shifted that culture. And I thought it would be a good idea just to hear from David in a short little video around what his thoughts are on the importance of customer centricity. So maybe we could show that video quickly now.
I think that it's changed in the sense that, you know, everyone you say, you know, customer service is important, and it's sort of like, you know, a truism. But what people are struggling with is how do they get the motivation in an organisation to transform, you need something that is constant driver for driving that improvement and transformation. And the only way that I know, you know, economy's coming up, the only way I know is, and I think people are realizing, is that if you focus on the customer and the demand from the customer, it gives you that reason to transform and to move forward. And yes, technology's there's lots of things you can do, but through using, you know, customer centricity as the motivator to change is very, very powerful. And I think that's partly what's happening. Also, maybe that, you know, globalization and with technology coming, people are looking for those points of differentiation. They're harder to find, but service is a major differentiator that can create value for your customer, value for the organisation, the shareholders, and that's really what it comes down to in the end. So I do think that's probably what's going on.
Thanks for that, Derek. So, you know, we heard there from David sort of talking about his perspective on things, and something that we've found in the research that we've done, and we've spent about 3.5 years doing research with organisations around the world to really understand this, was really that we found that it was a cultural trait. So it's not just about customer service, but it really is a culture where everyone is focused on the consumer or the customer, the external customer, and the experience that's being delivered by the organisation, regardless of the role that they play in that business. So whether it's not just the sales, marketing, customer service people, but it's people in IT, it's people particularly in IT, but those that are creating better experiences and better technology for customers to interact with. So I think that's the key point that we found in working with organisations like Telstra is, you know, it's really a pervasive culture that you're really trying to shift.
So, Chris, you developed a model where you had made a research over 3.5 years, and you were able to measure the organization culture and how it impacts the business performance based on this model you have developed, I believe. And my question is on the research. What's the size of the research, how many respondents were involved, how statistically it is reliable, or is it based on just one company or several companies across industries?
It's a great question. So, we built a project from the outset that was really designed to test, to create a model that is statistically valid and statistically reliable. So we actually had around about 120 organizations from different industries around the world that we built a model with about 160 different items that boiled down to 40 behavioral items. And those 40 behavioral items were shown to drive different business performance outcomes. And so I'll get to the model shortly to kind of explain that a little bit more, but thanks for bringing that up, Demet. One of the key things that, and I've got this slide on the screen here that's kind of a bit of a funny slide, but one of the key findings from it is that organizations that actually are really customer-centric, they don't sort of treat complaints the way that we're sort of seeing it treated here on the screen. You don't get your hand blown off by sort of making a complaint with these organizations. They really embrace complaints. So they're looking for feedback, positive and negative. They're looking to understand what's the experience like of dealing with our organization and how can we improve that. And so that's a big factor that we found, is that they're really organizations that are really looking for feedback. And just to jump back to that research, who are some of the organizations that we interviewed in that research? So they're companies like 3M, Starbucks here in the United States, Apple, Amazon, Salesforce, Virgin, Zappos, Lexus. These are companies that are global companies that are well known to be customer-centric, and really what makes them different is that they drive their decision-making through a customer lens. So all of their decisions are made with the customer's perspective in mind. And that's different from companies that are not customer-centric, because they tend to kind of not think about customers when they're making decisions oftentimes, and have negative impact on those customers' experiences. So these were some of the companies that...
Is there a direct correlation between employee engagement and customer-centric culture?
So the two things are related, Demet. So what we've found in our research is that employee engagement is important, but it's actually not enough. So we've found organizations that have good employee engagement and not necessarily delivering great customer experiences, but you need a certain level of engagement at the employee level to be able to deliver better customer experiences. So it's kind of, in some ways, it can be a prerequisite. The other thing that we've actually found, certainly with an organization like Telstra, is that by focusing on creating a customer culture, that actually drives up employee engagement. So organizations that have closer connections with the final customers are more engaged. And so the two things kind of work, in a synergistic way, if you like. So I'll talk a little bit about Amazon here quickly. I think Amazon is a great example of an organization. I mean, their mission is to be the world's most customer-centric organization or company. And here's Jeff Bezos talking about the fact that, they define Amazon by their big ideas, and the biggest idea that they have is really putting the customer at the center of everything they do. And if you speak to anyone that works at Amazon or has worked at Amazon, they do live and breathe this. This is part of the way in which they do business. And so it's not something that's just on a wall that, we want to be customer-centric. They actually live and breathe that. And I wanted to give you some examples of what does that mean? Like, what does a customer-centric mindset mean? What would we be doing differently if we all had a customer-centric mindset? And there's some good examples from a number of companies around the world. What we've boiled it down to is this idea of thinking differently about business in thinking about what's best for the customer in terms of, how can I create value for the customer, is going to be best for the business. So we use that as a sort of way of defining that mindset. So if I can really create a great experience, if I can maximize the value that I can deliver to that customer's going to repay me through continued business, referrals, all of those sorts of things. And so having that mindset in the business is a really important way to drive this. And if we look at a few quick examples here, Toyota, Virgin, there's a company called Chateau Elan in the US here, and Air New Zealand. And they've defined a sort of mindset in those businesses that drives the way in which people behave. And so for Toyota, it's remembering that actually it's not about the car, it's really about making customers fans for life of the Toyota brand. And so how do you do that? Well, yeah, you've got to deliver a great car. You need a great product. But then you've also got to pay attention to how customers use that product, how it's being serviced, those interaction points that they have. When something goes wrong, how do they deal with that? So it's really thinking about the lifetime value of a customer and thinking about not just this one transaction, but how do I make sure that we look after this customer for a lifetime.
Chris, as we talk about the automotive industry, and you have Toyota here as an example, all the big car manufacturers are talking about customer centricity, and they claim to be customer centric. So what they claim is they put the customer at the center of the business in everything they do. So what differentiates them when they all say the same thing?
That's a great question. I think that what differentiates them is ultimately what their customers believe. So, do their customers believe that they're dealing with a company that's got their best interests at heart? And so, there's different ways to measure that. And, to a certain extent, there are a number of car companies that are pretty good at this. I think Toyota and Lexus are probably the best. But ultimately, that's what it comes down to, is what's the customer believe? And what we've found in the research is that there are big differences between what companies say and what customers really believe and suggest about that experience. It's a really competitive environment, so different customers are going to be attracted to different brands, and it's a matter of being at the center of the world for that particular customer that you're going after. Your brand needs to be the center of their world, and if you do that effectively, then you really are operating in a customer-centric way. So really it comes down to what do the customers say. Another example from this list here is Air New Zealand, which is an interesting one. They were losing about $500 million for a number of years in the early 2000s, and there's a leader that came in there, Ralph Norris, his name is. And what he found was they became very operationally focused. So they were very focused on getting people on the plane, getting them off, turning the plane over really quickly, getting it cleaned, and then moving, improving on-time performance, all of those sort of operational metrics. And so, when you ask people at Air New Zealand, they'd say, look, we're in the business of flying planes. And Ralph said, look, we're losing money. We're obviously doing something wrong. In fact, what we're really in the business of is flying people. We're yes, we fly planes, but we're really in the business of flying people. And if that is the mindset that we have, do we really focus on all of these operational metrics around getting people on and off the plane really fast, making sure that, that these operational metrics are in place? When we think about the fact that we're actually flying people, we're actually trying to think about, well, how do we take care of those people? How do we make sure that it's a good experience? Yes, we need to get them on the plane, but how do we do that in a way that makes everyone feel good? And they were able to shift the organizational culture to get people to think about really what their purpose was creating a great experience, a great flying experience. And that resulted in them turning the business around to where they're, $500 million profit within 3 years. And there's a shift in the way in which you think about things. Now, if you think about things differently, then the metrics change, the way people behave changes, and that follows. So it's really about a mindset at the top and at the leadership level that can create this change.
And it also, I think, starts with the leadership and how they define the values of the company. because the values of the company would be showing how they create value also for the customers and how they create value also for their employees. So I think it really starts with the mission of the company and setting the values for the whole organization that has to match with the customer centricity.
Yeah, absolutely. You need to have those things aligned. And I think, this next chart's, often we get things backwards, right? So businesses are trying to generate profit for shareholders. And in many ways they've been defined as being organizations that are driving, profitable growth. But how do you actually get that? And the way you get that, if you look at the pyramid here, that we would argue is you start with people and a culture that is focused on creating value for customers. And the more effective you are at executing that, then you will deliver a better experience. You'll deliver higher levels of satisfaction, higher net promoter scores, however you want to measure that. And that does drive business performance outcomes. It does drive financial outcomes. And so that's really the way to think about how culture connects with business performance. It's really a foundational thing that needs to be there to build a sustainable organization. And, it's not just our research, but this is some research from another organization that looked at, over a 7-year period, the top performers in the S&P 500 in the United States, and they looked at their stock performance over the 7-year period. And you can see on the left-hand side here, those companies that do this well, that really are customer-centric, outperform in terms of stock and shareholder returns over this 7-year period. And those that don't do this well are really, they're just trimming along with the market, or even less than the market, as you can see in this chart. So there's no question that if you can get this right, it does drive business performance. It's not necessarily an easy thing to get right, but I think part of our goal with the work that we were doing is create some tangibility around these ideas. And to get back to your point from earlier, Demet, I think, for us, what we've found in the research that we've looked at is that customer culture, or customer-centric culture, is really employee engagement on steroids. So if you've got a sort of, there's two ways to think about it. Customer culture can drive up employee engagement. And if you've already got a good level of employee engagement, then customer culture can really drive a better customer experience and better business performance. So that's how those things really relate. And so let's have a quick look at, what are these disciplines of customer culture? What is it that they do differently from other organizations? What we found were there were 5 externally orientated behaviors and 3 internal enablers of those behaviors in the research that we did. And those 5 external ones are related to customers. There are 2 dimensions related to customers. So customer insight and foresight. So as the terms describe, customer insight is really about your existing customers, what their needs are, measuring satisfaction, making sure we're delivering great experiences for them. So it's about our existing customers. Customer foresight then is about the future customers. How are we attracting new business to our organisation? What are their future needs? Thinking about the future. And so it's really about having foresight and getting ahead of things. If you think about these really customer-centric organisations, they're very innovative. They're always thinking about the future, about future needs, about trends and where things are going. Then you've got the 2 competitor dimensions, so competitor insight and foresight. Competitor insight's about our existing competitors. Competitor foresight is about our future competitors. Will we one day be competing with a company like Amazon? If you think about what Amazon's doing and they're branching out into different industries, it's very likely that they will touch more industries in the future. How would we compete with them? What's different about what we do compared to Amazon? And then the last one is peripheral vision, which is really to do with all of these trends that we see related to technology, so the digitization of products and services, the social media aspects, all of those aspects that I mentioned up front. Do we have a good understanding of those broader trends, the shift to mobile, the shift to, all sorts of, different political shifts and so on. So that's that broader sort of environment that we're looking at. And then there's 3 internal enablers that we've we've seen to be very powerful. One is empowerment. So are people in a position to actually do the right thing for customers? Are they empowered to do that? Do they have the skills to do that? Cross-functional collaboration. Are we working just in silos? Do we have business units that work in isolation of others and really don't collaborate effectively and leverage, the skills of different functional areas? So that's cross-functional collaboration. And then the last one is alignment. So Demet, you mentioned before, do people understand the mission? Do they understand the vision? Are the values clear about, what's important in the business when we're making decisions? And so these are really important enablers of those other 5 behaviours that are really related to the external environment.
Chris, I just would like to remind to the audience that they can ask questions by typing in the box, and I think it would also be better if it's more interactive than just a one-way communication. Absolutely.
So if you've got questions as we go, please shoot them into the chat there. I'm going to talk just quickly about, lessons from some of the world's most customer-centric organizations. So I'll give you a couple of examples of what these companies do. Just to go back to Amazon, if you think about decision-making at Amazon, how they think about their customers. There's a great story with Jeff Bezos. When he first started the Amazon business, he was the first one to put those rating scales on the web. So you've seen those. If you go to an Amazon site, or if you go to any site these days, you'll see customer ratings. You'll see a 5-star is the normal sort of rating system. 1 star obviously is not so good. 5 stars, fantastic. First person to implement that. When he did that with books, he actually got a phone call from the CEO of Barnes & Noble that said, "Hey, why are you doing that? If you have books on your website that have 1-star ratings, you're not going to sell any of those books. Why would you do that?" And Jeff Bezos said, "Look, you don't understand our business. We don't want to sell 1-star books. We're trying to empower the customer to make a better decision. We want to sell them the 5-star books. And we want them to be empowered to understand which book's going to be a good book, which book's not such a good book." And so that's a customer way of thinking, right? Mm-hmm. It's a way of thinking, what's the best thing for the customer, provide transparency, reviews, and so on, and that's going to empower them to make better decisions. So that's a quick example from them. There are many examples from Amazon around that thinking.
Actually,
another quick example.
Coming back to that star rating, they're not fooling the customer. Their objective is to make profit by giving more information, more objective information to the customer, so that they know how to make their purchase decision. Because you can fool a customer once, and then there will not be any repeat purchase. But this way, they also create a space for the customer where they come back with repeat purchases because they had a good customer experience by seeing all these objective reviews.
Yes, yeah. And you're right, Demet. I think it's a big part of this is creating alignment, as much alignment as possible between, what's best for your customer and what's best for your business. Mm-hmm. And the more alignment you have between those two things, the better. If you're working against customers, and then obviously it's a very difficult path forward. And another quick example for you here is a great company that I really like. There's a company called Naked Wines. It's a business that was started, I think in Britain originally, but the CEO is an Australian guy called Luke Jex. And Luke is a great leader. This is a business that's about $1 billion business now, and they sell wine direct to consumers from the winery to the consumer. So it's an online model, and been very, very successful with it. But what's great about them is they're very, very customer centric, and the way he likes to describe it is that really having a very strong customer culture, a very strong focus on value for customers, is the kryptonite for disruptors. So if you're really looking after customers and they're very, very happy with what you're doing, you're not going to be disrupted because, you know, you're doing great things for them and you're paying attention to what their needs are and the trends and so on. And so it really becomes something that gives you protection from competitors. And one of the things that I like about what they do is when I was in their offices a couple of years ago, there was this great celebration down one corner of the office. And I said, you know, look, what's going on down there? And he said, they're having a giraffe moment. You could see the picture of the giraffe there. And I said, well, what's a giraffe moment? He said, it's basically someone sticking their neck out for a customer. So, you know, something's happened. Customers had a problem. And someone in the business there has gone the extra mile to really make sure that that customer's experience is right. And so they've celebrated that. And so that's the cultural part of this, right? Do we celebrate people doing the right thing for customers? Is that part of our culture? Is that what we're about? And that's what we see in really customer-centric organizations.
I love the example here, the giraffe moment. I will use that in the future. I think it's very relevant. What I also discovered while you were talking, I think about the old big companies where there's a big legacy. And if they do not think of ways disrupting their own business model, somebody else will disrupt it for them, right? So the example you give here is very interesting, especially for the long time, for the legacy companies, that they should take it as an example.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, it's not easy to do, but it's a matter of survival, right? And if we think about what happened to Kodak, we think about what's happened to Nokia, even Barnes and Noble. These are organisations that have really not been paying enough attention to the customer environment, and they've been disrupted because, you know, things have changed and they haven't been able to adapt their business. And you know, that's something that Jeff Bezos in particular has learnt a lot from. And he talks a lot about, you know, their day one mentality, because even though they're an organisation with, you know, 500,000 employees now, they are still in the mindset of following customer trends and really adapting their organisation and closing businesses that are not relevant anymore and doing it quickly. And so that's what you find in organisations that have very strong customer culture. Quick example, and the insurance space here in the United States, insurance is a big issue here for most consumers because it's very, very expensive, very complicated, very difficult. There's a company here called Oscar that's really making healthcare easy, accessible, and affordable, which is a big deal here in the United States. And something that they found that's really interesting is that they've got an app that they've developed that allows you as an insurance customer to call a doctor anytime at no cost. And so you can get hold of a doctor and talk to them before you go to an emergency room or something like that. And it's a great thing for customers, and it's a great thing for Oscar because it means they're not having to pay for people going to the emergency room and so on. And so, you know, just building a more customer-centric insurance company around the healthcare industry, they've had tremendous success in doing that. They've really tapped into something that's a huge need here in the US. And the last example I'll just give you here is there's a hospital down here in the Silicon Valley area in the Monterey Peninsula called Community Hospital Monterey Peninsula. And this gentleman here, Eric Lamanaka, is one of the most customer-centric leaders that I've come across. He's got a team of about 500 people, and he's responsible for the cancer treatment for a lot of these people in the hospital. And he found that he really wanted to be able to, in real time, get feedback from customers and be able to fix it on the spot. I think that the history of customer feedback is, you know, we get these surveys, we get this information from a month ago or a quarter ago, and we look at the numbers and we go, oh yeah, we had satisfied customers. But that's kind of in the past, right? And there's nothing you can do about it now. We either had satisfied customers or we didn't. And really these days it's about real time and it's about the future. And he implemented this simple system where you get a QR code on your phone, you put your camera up to there, and there's a direct line to him as the leader of this 500-person team, and that message goes straight to him, and he reacts to it immediately. And sometimes personally, or one of his team members goes and responds to it. So, something's happened in a room, someone's not happy with something, and they respond to it immediately. And that's driven up the satisfaction of patients in real time dramatically. They've gone from sort of the 60th percentile to the 90th percentile of hospitals in terms of their feedback. So it's just being proactive, doing things on the spot, and it's a great example of a guy that really does that. So what can you do to influence your organisation's cultures? All of you that are here are wanting some ideas, I'm sure, about how do you do this? How do we actually impact our organisations? And, at an individual level, I think there's a number of things that we can do. Whether or not our senior leadership team is customer-centric or not, we can be customer-centric in the way that we do things. And, there's some simple things that can be done, like putting customers on the agenda of every meeting. It's a simple thing that creates a practice of thinking about customers, the impact that we're having. How does our work impact them? What is it that we're doing each week that impacts our customers? And that's a simple thing that we can all do. The other thing is that, really seeking out customer feedback needs to be a key metric for people. So really embedding customer feedback and embedding a feedback culture in the organisation must become part of just the way in which you do business. That's what we're finding with really customer-centric organisations. They're looking for that feedback all the time, and it's operationalised as part of their metrics. It's not just the financial metrics. We've got customer metrics at the top level, and then broadly sharing customer insights. What are we learning that's unique about customers? How do we share that across the business? How do we share stories of great successes? What is it that we're doing, to really impact customers and improve their lives? Really making that part of the conversation. And then the last thing is really a customer-centric mindset is really talking about what is it that they want, not really what we want, not our preferences and what we need, but what is it that they need, and then how do we actually deliver against that and also meet our own needs, right? So it's a way of thinking externally about the customer. So there's some simple things that we can all do to shift the culture. I think from an organisational point of view, you have to start with measurement. If you don't measure how customer-centric you are as an organisation, there is no way for you to really understand whether you're moving the needle or improving. And so what we built was a measurement framework. You can see here on the left-hand side what a high customer culture performer looks like. That's a company like Amazon, for instance, would look a bit like that. And then on the right-hand side, we've got a company that's got a low level of customer culture. So they're very collaborative internally, but they're really not orientated externally to the customer environment. And so, the reason to measure is to really understand, what is it that we're doing really well? How strong are we, and what are those dimensions? And what are we not doing so well? So it gives us a framework for thinking about this, and it also helps provide a language for the senior leadership to understand, how customer-centric we are as an organisation and where we can improve. And so with that, I wanted to share some results from those of you that completed the MRI survey before the webinar today. And we actually had 15 in the end. I managed to get the results from the 14. So all of the results that you completed on the webinar here are combined in this particular, what we call a circumplex. It's a way of presenting the data. It's a benchmark. And what you can see here is that the overall MRI benchmark is 40%. And what that means is that if we take the group of responses that we had from the webinar today, and that was an organisation, then it would be at the 40th percentile, which means that its responses to the survey were greater than 40% of the companies in the database that we have. And that database is now a little over 350 organisations from around the world. And it includes companies that are very customer-centric, like Amazon, Apple, 3M, Starbucks, organisations that are very customer-centric. So you can imagine when you benchmark against those, your results are going to be lower than you would expect against really the most customer-centric organizations.
So
Now,
Chris, based
yep.
on this result, how do you define whether the MRI benchmark is at low, medium, or upper level? Is 40% a mid-level, or is it towards the low part of the benchmark?
So it's lower. So if we think about the 50th percentile, the 50% mark being the middle of the database, and again, this is a database of organizations that are quite customer-centric. So being in the middle of that means that you're, reasonably customer-centric. You're not completely, internally focused or not paying attention to customers. At the 40th percentile, you're below that middle mark, so you're not as customer-centric as certainly the more customer-centric organizations. And if this was a company, you would want to be improving this.
I also believe that the results would be more meaningful if you compare it per sector. So you compare an industrial environment to an industrial environment, or you don't compare it to an FMCG company. But of course, with only 14 respondents who are attending to our webcast today, we had more registrations, but 14 people have answered the questionnaire. That would not be possible, but in a larger scale of respondents, I think you are also able to define it per sector and see how they benchmark within that sector. Is that correct?
Yeah, you can to a certain degree, Demet, and I'm glad you brought that up. We've debated over the years a lot around, do we need to look at this by industry? And we've done some work where we've looked at it by industry, and we've done some specific industry studies as well. What we've really found is that the tool is really designed to mobilize and create an energy around moving to become more customer-centric. So does it matter that we're at 40% or 50%? Not really. What matters is that we want to be closer to 70 or 80% on the benchmark. We want to be improving how customer-centric we are as an organization. We want to shift the needle. Now, if the leadership doesn't want to do that, then it doesn't matter. It's not on the agenda. But if the organization does want to do that, then really the goal is to shift the needle, is to move to become more customer-centric, regardless of the industry we're in. And as I said at the outset, you know what? Customers don't care what industry you're in. They just want a good experience. Okay. And so, in some ways, we're comparing all companies to these really customer-centric organizations. That's setting the benchmark for us. That's setting the expectation for consumers. Okay. And so what we've found with organizations is sometimes, if there's real desire to look at the industry, so we can look at certain industries like the telecommunications industry, for instance, and I can tell you that most organizations in the telecommunications industry are below the 50 percentile. So they would be at 30 or 40%. So most of them are down there. So there's an opportunity for those that really want to become more customer-centric to actually outperform their competitors. And that's what happened with a company like Telstra, where they decided we want to be better. We want to deliver a better experience, and we're going to take a look at how customer-centric we are to do that.
Okay, all right. Thanks for the answer. I also have a question from the audience. How do you define who is going to attend the survey, who the respondents are? Are they leaders? Are they N-1? Are they all frontline employees, or is it across all employees? So how do you define the sample?
That's a great question. So if the purpose of implementing the MRI is to really shift the organizational culture, then we always ask companies to do as many people in the organization as possible. In fact, we give everyone the opportunity to do that. In some organizations where you've got people that are very far removed from actually impacting the customer's experience, we might not include those people. But really, we're looking at the leadership level. So we do it certainly at the top leadership level. by different business units, by sales, marketing, customer service, but then IT, legal, HR, operations, engineering, all of the different functional areas, we would ask them to complete the survey also. And that gives us, a wide range of data. We can see which groups believe that they're, operating more customer-centrically than others. And so we can get a good picture of the overall organisation. And also it gives us, the tool as a way to actually engage employees in getting them to think about how customer-centric the organisation is and what can be done to improve it. So when this is deployed, we get open-ended feedback from employees on what is it that the senior leadership needs to do to drive more customer-centric approach to what we're doing. So there's a lot of feedback that comes from that. So if you just want to understand a benchmark, then you can just take a sample of the organisation and say, you've got 10,000 people in your organisation, probably 1,500 completed surveys will give you an accurate view of what the result is for that organisation. So there's two ways to implement the tool. But we recommend that companies implement it, that are serious about being customer-centric. Okay. The other part of the survey at the end, there's sort of 4 questions here that are really talking about, whether or not I believe improving our customer experience is the organisation's highest priority. And you can see here the results were that most of you on the call here was suggesting that, strongly agree that it is a priority for your organisations. I understand how my job impacts the customer experience. That was fairly high as well. You can see agree and strongly agree on the slide here. I said positive income outcome for me as a result of improving our customer experience, again, very high. So these are all positive responses. But then when we get to really whether or not management would take action based on this, it was kind of a mixed result here. And, I think this is a question that we include often in the survey responses as well. I mean, we want the leadership to really buy into this and take action. And if they're not going to, it's very difficult to shift organisational culture, right? So it's certainly the top leadership needs to understand and believe that the customer experience is important because it's going to drive our competitiveness and our business performance going forward.
I think also what is interesting is to benchmark the survey results with so many different other factors, such as the business performance, such as the employee engagement of that function, such as the customer satisfaction results, such as the NPS. So all different metrics, I think, would give a big picture to understand what this survey results are telling to the leadership to take an action upon.
Exactly right. I think that leads me perfectly into this next slide, actually. I mean, why does this matter? And the senior leadership of any organisation, certainly publicly traded organisations, their responsibilities are to deliver profitable growth and shareholder returns. So that is what they're charged with doing. So how do they do that? And why should they worry about, developing this type of culture? Well, the reason for it is that it does drive business performance. It does drive business results. And the slide that we're looking at here shows the linkages that we found between how people responded on the MRI assessment, the customer culture of MRI assessment, and these different metrics that we were measuring. So from customer satisfaction, innovation, new product success through to sales revenue growth. And you can see what's interesting. I mean, those internal enablers are really, really important. So strategic alignment, cross-functional collaboration drives all of those business performance outcomes. Empowerment's really important for customer satisfaction and innovation. If you want to drive profitability, then understand the competitive landscape is really, really important for those things. So you can see how these different factors are driven by these cultural factors, if you like. So these business performance outcomes are driven by these cultural factors, and if you get those right, then you get those business performance outcomes. And so, I guess the last question is, how do you do this? How do you actually shift organizational culture? And you'll find in the book, this is a sort of updated version of the one that's in the book, but you'll see a lot of case studies and examples and initiatives that are taken and have been taken at organisations to actually shift the organisation's culture to being more customer-centric. But the way to start is with measurement, as I said, and usually that starts with the leadership and then gets rolled out across an organisation. And then part of it is educating leaders on what is a customer-centric culture, what is it that I need to do as a leader, how do I need to lead the organisation, what do I need to emphasise, how do I need to communicate, how do I shift my style to ensure that we're shaping the organisation's culture in a way that the customers are at the centre of that. So that's what really the workshop's about. And then how do you actually inspire employees in middle management, at the front line, to really to be more customer centric, and that's a process in itself in terms of train the trainer, that sort of thing. There are different ways to do that, different interventions that can help employees really take this on. And then ultimately, you want to end up at the right-hand side here. You want to have an organisation culture that is customer-centric, that is paying attention to the external environment, that's adaptable, so that the organisation continues to be successful and grow, and be there in the future and have a legacy. So that's really the overall sort of way of thinking about that. That kind of concludes the sort of main part of my presentation, Demet, and I'm more than happy to take questions. Obviously, there's a lot more in the book in terms of how to do this and what's involved.
Well, thank you, Chris. My question is there the second edition of the book?
That's a great question. So, the last 3 or 4 years, myself and Lyndon, who's the co-author, and Lyndon's been driving the research, have spoken to almost 100 leaders around the world. So these are individuals that we would describe as really customer-obsessed leaders. And so our next book is going to be on customer-obsessed leadership. So we're right in the sort of research phase on that at the moment, and it's really exciting. It's really interesting to look at what are those traits. How do you actually build those? How do you create those in yourself? So that's kind of our next project at the moment.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. You're talking about theory and how theory relates back to practical real life with all these examples. And I think the model is also very interesting because you show how you measure the organization culture to make it become more customer-centric. So from all these perspectives, I think the content is very valuable. Thanks a lot, Chris, for putting the time on this. Before closing the webcast, I would like to say that I'm leading the customer experience and also market insights and analytics council here in Europe. So if you're interested in these kind of topics, these are our hot topics that we discuss in a peer networking in a very small membership organization where we're able to help each other to grow further in our careers, in our personal and professional development. The last thing is there's a very small brief evaluation form. Just take a few seconds to fill that in, please. And we look forward to seeing you in another webcast in a topic that relates to customer experience or market insights and analytics. Thank you very much.